What is going on, guys? Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. In today's review, we're going to be taking a look at the iFi Zen Can Signature and the iFi Zen DAC Signature. Now, before we get on into today's review, I just have to give a big thanks to iFi for sending out these early samples of these two units. Both these units are currently available on Drop, and they are Drop exclusive products, and iFi sent me these out a little bit early to check out to let you all know if they are worth picking up. But once again, big thanks to them for providing these for review. Now, this is actually my second take doing this review because I did do this in preparation to release this video with the initial release of them on Drop. But after seeing the listing on Drop's website, I realized that they changed some of the information that I was previously given about these two units. So in an effort to provide the most accurate review possible, I decided to postpone it a day to reshoot the review so I can give you the most up-to-date information possible about both of these units to help you make the best decision. But anyway, let's hop on into an overview of these two units. So this is a new stack for mass drop made by iFi, and this stack is basically made specifically for the Sennheiser HD6XX, which is sitting over here, which is a very successful product, sold well over 100,000 units at this point. And this stack obviously can be used with other headphones, but it does have that HD6XX EQ button on there, which we'll talk about what that does in just a bit. But let's go ahead and do specs real quick, and then we will talk about how this stack, I guess, stacks up, pun fully intended. But anyway, these two units both come in at $249. If you buy the Zen Can Signature, you get the DAC for $229, but if you buy the DAC alone, then it will be $249. So as for the amp, we're just going to do power output numbers because otherwise we'll be here rattling off numbers for too long. So at 16 ohms, you get 600 milliwatts balanced, 1 watt single-ended. At 300 ohms, you get 756 milliwatts balanced, 196 milliwatts single-ended, and at 600 ohms, you get 385 milliwatts balanced and 98 milliwatts single-ended. As for the DAC, it is a Burr Brown DAC and supports all the formats that you would expect: PCM, DSD, DXD, as well as full MQA decoding, and it is a balanced DAC. And that is about it for the really interesting specs here on these two units. Now, one disclaimer real quick before we move further into this review. On the Zen DAC Signature here, the logos will be changed for the final unit. I will throw a photo up of what the final unit of the DAC will look like, and I believe the logos on the amplifier also will change very slightly. So please look at the links in the description below of both units for the most up-to-date information in terms of how they look. But let's talk about the build of these two units. Okay, so now as for build, the build on the two units is about the same. You have a anodized aluminum chassis in that mass drop midnight blue color with a brushed aluminum faceplate. The buttons feel kind of cheap. They kind of spin around, and you can hear them just jiggling around. And I've also had problems with like pushing them, and then they either like don't register or they register twice. But that might change on the final production. But the buttons feel kind of cheap. Little rubber feet on the bottom. But anyway, going over the Zen Can Signature 6XX amplifier. So you have power button, your 3 different input switch. You have your gain, so you have 0, 6, 12, and 18 decibels of gain. You have your volume knob, which is kind of like an angular volume knob with a little dot indicator, 1/4 inch output, 4.4 millimeter output, and your button here to enable your HD6XX EQ profile and your 3D settings. Moving around to the back, you have your 3 inputs. So you have 4.4 millimeter balanced input, 3.5 millimeter input, and RCA input. And you also have a balanced 4.4 millimeter pre-output, and then your barrel power plug, because this unit does use a little wall wart. And that is the overview of the Zen Can Signature 6XX. As for the Zen DAC Signature, on the front you just have the same volume knob. The body is otherwise the same as the Zen Can Signature. On the back you have 4.4 millimeter output. You have your switch that switches this between a line output and a pre-output. So if you switch it over to variable, you can control the pre-outs with the knob, but otherwise if you put it in fixed, then it just line outputs. So if you're using speakers, put it in variable and you can control them with the knob, but otherwise put it in fixed just to output to your headphone amplifier. USB input, which is the only input into this DAC, no optical inputs in this, and then also another power plug input, which is not completely required because you can power this DAC over USB, but according to the mass drop listing, it does include a power brick, so you can also plug it in, or you can just use USB and data over the same power. And that is the overview of the two units. Okay, so now let's go over the quirks and features of the two units, going all Doug DeMuro here. So probably the biggest quirk of these two units is the balanced. These units are both balanced, but they are using 4.4 millimeter throughout. A DAC that outputs 4.4 millimeter is very strange, and an amp that accepts it as an input is also very strange. 4.4 output on an amplifier is not as uncommon, especially these days. We see more and more amps coming out with 4.4 outputs, but 4.4 inputs on amps and 4.4 outputs on DACs is very strange. And then also a 4.4 pre-out is also strange. So on the listing right now, they are selling a 4.4 millimeter interconnect to connect these two for about $90, which is pretty expensive for an interconnect. I'm going to be completely honest with you. This is one that I found on Amazon. When I got these two, I was like, does anybody make a 4.4 male to male? And I scoured Amazon, and on like page 6, I found this guy. I think it was like $22, $23. It's made by a company called Youkamoo. And I actually have some of their adapters, which is like this one here, which we'll talk about in just a second. But this is a little 4.4 to 4.4 millimeter interconnect. And all you do is you just come around here to the back, 4.4 out of the DAC, 4.4 into the amp, like so. And there you go. You are now connected and balanced throughout. Just run USB to your DAC, a little power output to your amp, and this little 4.4 jumper, and you're good to go. So that is a really nice and clean setup. And I actually like how this Youkamoo one looks on these two units. The blue kind of looks very nice. So if you want to run them balanced, you are going to need a jumper. Hopefully this one comes back in stock on Amazon. You can pick this one up instead of the $90 one that they're offering on drop. And then let's go over the quirks and features of the amp, because this is the quirkiest thing here. So the first quirk is that you're going to have a 4.4 millimeter output for your balance, no XLR. And most people don't have 4.4 millimeter cables on their headphones. People will usually have them on their IEMs, but for most people with headphones, you're going to need an adapter. So this is the Youkamoo 4.4 to 4-pin XLR adapter. I will link this below. So all you got to do, just do that, and then you have a standard 4-pin female you can plug your XLR balanced headphones into. And then as for the other features, let's talk about the 6XX button, because that is pretty much the big selling point of this unit. Hence its name, Zen Can Signature HD6XX. Dropcan was the old name of this thing. So this amplifier basically is setting out to fix the two biggest complaints with the HD6XX. And that is the bass roll-off and the soundstage. So that HD6XX EQ button, basically what it does is it it puts on a EQ that basically just counters the bass roll off. It's not EQing it to Harmon, but it's just trying to get it to flat. It ends up being slightly more than flat, but that's basically what it's going for, is just a flat bass response. And I have to say, it works pretty well. I was surprised how little. It doesn't really distort, where it's usually EQing HD600 series in their bass doesn't work well, but surprisingly it doesn't distort. And it was really interesting actually having sub bass extension out of an HD600 series headphone. That's really cool, and I actually really enjoyed having that. It's something that I just never have experienced before, really, without big distortion. So the EQ button works really well. And also of note, that bass boost is not just for the 6XX, it'll also work for the 580, the 600, the 650, 660, 58X. They all have roughly the same bass roll-off, so it pretty much is universal. And I guess other headphones with bass roll-off, it could work, or if you just want to put a really big bass shelf on a planar or something, works for that too. So you can play around with that bass boost button. And then the 3D settings is that iFi's 3D, whatever they do, where basically what it does is it takes like the left and right images that sound like maybe they're like here and kind of moves them to like here, a little bit more to your side, and it gives the illusion of having more soundstage. This one is a lot more subtle than a lot of their other products that I have tried their 3D thing on, and it's kind of nice. It works well enough. It's not as good as an actual wider soundstage, and it doesn't make the 6XX sound wide, but it does help give the illusion of having a little bit more stage for those of you that find the 6XX rather claustrophobic. So those are the primary features and quirks of these two units. So now on to the most important thing here. How do the two units sound? So let's start with the amplifier, the Zen Can Signature 6XX. Now I have to say, at their price point, I was actually surprised that this is coming in at a $500 price point for this stack. When they first showed this off, like before CanJam this year, I was expecting this to be like a shit stack competitor at, I don't know, maybe 200, 250, 300 tops. 500 is a lot more than I expected. And for a $500 stack, give or take, you can get a little bit of discount, but more or less $500 stack. There are some big players in this space, even among Drop's own product lineup, and we'll reserve these comparisons for the end here, but let's go over the amplifier. So the amplifier sounds pretty good, but for $250, I do think it's behind the Asgard 3 that I recently reviewed. You obviously have less power than the Asgard 3, and I don't think it sounds as detailed. I think the staging is a little bit more compressed. It's a little bit more glary, a little bit more hazy than the Asgard 3, and overall just does not sound as clean. I don't think it sounds bad by any means. I think it's definitely a decent sounding headphone amplifier, but for its price point, it's certainly not the best thing in its class. Now, there are reasons to get this over some other headphone amplifiers, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but I think it sounds a little bit hazy with a little bit of glare, but it has a decent amount of power, it looks nice, and it sounds acceptable for its price, but definitely not class leading, so I'd say it sounds about average for its price point. Now, the DAC, on the other hand, I think is a harder sell. This thing, if you're used to iFi Burr Brown DACs, you kind of know what to expect. This is that like warm, bright iFi Burr Brown sound. My biggest issue with this DAC, and I primarily compared it to my Shit Modi 3 because it's the only other really cheap-ish DAC I have lying around. My issue with this DAC primarily is the really blunted transients. Like the attacks on this are very softened and kind of muted. I was testing some like really crisp string tracks back and forth between this and the Modi. And the Modi, they're very sharp, very crisp, very impactful. And this just kind of blunts them all. They sound much more smoothed over and softened. I think this is more detailed than the Madi. It sounds more resolving overall, particularly those little micro details, but it's brighter and it's warmer. It's like that warm, bright, burr brown kind of sound, and kind of smeared overall on its attacks. And I'm not a massive fan of how this DAC sounds. It's certainly not the worst DAC for the money by any means, but I think you can do better for the money for sure than this DAC. I'm not a huge fan of how this DAC sounds. Now, as a whole in synergy, when you stack them together, you get your balance going. I think it's a decent sounding stack. I think I would personally sub in another DAC for the bottom one, but some people do like that warm, bright kind of iFi sound. I know a lot of you really like the micro, and if you're used to the micro, that's kind of what this is going to sound like, this DAC. And overall, I think it's a decent sounding setup. However, the problem is that price point, $500 more or less for this stack. That is a tough sell. So, and I'm going to explain why now. So, like I mentioned, I was really expecting this to be more of a shit stack competitor. But instead, we're coming in here at about a $500 price point, so we got big players to kill here. And like I mentioned, even within Drop's own product lineup, you have direct competitors to this that I think are more compelling. So this is $250 amplifier, which is only $50 less than Drop's own, THX AAA 789. Very highly revered amplifier. So many people love it. I think it's a good amplifier, and it's really good for its price point. And the 789, I do think, is a much better amplifier than the Drop Can Signature for a marginal amount more money. Now, it does lack a lot of the features that this does, but it is a much cleaner sounding amplifier. It's certainly more analytical than this. This is a little bit more warm and a little bit brighter than the 789. Well, the 789 is very clinical and kind of dry, but the 789 is more powerful. It has a full XLR balanced output, and all in all, is just a better amplifier than this. It's also bigger, and it lacks the features, but I digress. I think that's a better amplifier. And then you also have the Grace S-DAC balanced in Massdrop's own lineup for $150, which I don't think is as resolving as a DAC of this, but I don't think it's as warm, bright, and as blunted as the Zen DAC Signature is. I used to own one, and it's a pretty good DAC for its price point. And that's just within Drop's own product lineup. We have other stuff in the market too. We have the Asgard 3 and the recently released shit Modius. Now, the Asgard 3 is not balanced. It lacks some of these EQ features, but it has more power. I think it sounds better than this amplifier. It's also larger. It runs hotter. So there's certainly trade-offs, but if we're going for raw sound quality, I think the Asgard 3 Modius stack is better. And with the Modius, you have full XLR outputs. You don't have to go with find a 4.4 to XLR adapter to use either the preamp on this or just the XLR outs to another amplifier out of this DAC. So that's quite nice. And then we even have stuff like the SMSL SP200 and its new matching DAC, or you can get the SP200 in the Modius, or you can get the JDS Labs EL Stack 2. There are really big players out there in this price point. The monoprice THX 788, you can get that all in one unit for about the same price as this. The 887 plus some balanced DAC. So this is a really hot segment right now with a lot of really good players. And for all out sound quality, I don't think this lives up quite to its price point for $500. I wish this was like a $299 stack. For a $299 stack, I think this would be pretty good and compelling, but $500 is a tough sell. But let me come up with a reason of why you would buy this stack. I think the biggest selling point for this, more so than really anything, or I'll give you two. The two biggest selling points for this is the look, if you like it. Some people don't like this look. I personally really like how this stack looks. I think it's a Very nice looking stack. I like the blue, I like the shape, it feels nice, it looks premium, and it definitely is like a desk centerpiece. It looks very, very nice. And then the other reason to buy it is, again, the feature set. So you have a lot of power. This thing can power pretty much anything you throw at it. I was doing the HE6 on this thing. It doesn't have the power to give it the good slam, but it certainly gets loud enough. The HD 6XX on the lowest gain was loud, like my 80-85 dB listening volume, like here on the lowest gain. And you have 18 dB a gain, and the knob goes to like there. So this thing's got a lot of voltage and a lot of power to power headphones. But you have the features. You have the 4.4, which some people like, no XLR, which some people will not like. But then you have the HD 6XX EQ profile, which again I think works a little bit better than just doing a EQ for a lot of people. But an EQ is free. You can just put a low shelf on it in PCQ or something, and that works more or less as well. I might distort a little bit more. And then you have the soundstage boost, which is nice, but it's a little bit more subtle. So you really have to value the features to go with this stack, I think, over a lot of its competitors. But I guess other reasons, it's very small, it runs relatively cool, it looks nice. And yeah, that's about all my thoughts on these two things. I would say the amplifier is a much easier sell. I think it's a decent amp pick for certain people, and I think it sounds fairly good, but the DAC is a tougher sell. I don't think they're going to sell nearly as many of the DACs as they are the amplifier. But anyway, in conclusion, I think that this is a little bit too expensive for what it is. I don't think it's bad by any means. I think it's a decent stack. I just think it's a little bit too expensive for where it needs to be in the market. But the amplifier, I think, is definitely the more worthwhile of the two. So the Dropcan Signature 6XX will get my recommendation for certain people with certain use cases. And the DAC, I really struggle to recommend the DAC. I would say probably pass on that. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the Zen Can Signature 6XX and the Zen DAC Signature. Links of where to buy these in the description below, as well as my Twitter, my contact email, the ears graph showing the 6XX EQ, and all other relevant information. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the review. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.